I thought it'd be a reasonable idea to try and show some of the Thames to Severn Canal, the canal that once linked the two mighty rivers. So as a starting point I've come here, and where you see the flag, that's where the canal entered the Severn. Unfortunately this is as near as we're going to get because it's now on private land, but I do have photographs. And there you have it, Mr. John White, lock keeper, sat on the gate, photograph taken around 1900 showing the lock leading out into the Severn. The route is Famelode, Stonehouse through the Stroud, up the Charford Valley to Sapperton, through the escarpment to Coates, round past Cricklade, Inglesham, right by Lechlade. This is about 100 yards away from the river, and now you can see the canal heading inland to start its journey to the Thames. Buildings on the left were built to service the canal, and a lot of the buildings in this little area here did the same. That tells a story. So this one we can drive to, as you can see, this entrance. We're going to have to hike, I think, on the other one, at the other end, which is here, 30 miles farther on. Well, this is the trailhead that we've chosen then for our walk into the Thames side of the Thames and Severn Canal. Park here, wander in. Lechlade. And there you can just about make out in the March mist the objective. So what you see behind me is either the start or the end of the Thames Severn Canal, depending on which way you go. I prefer to call this the end because it was started at the Severn. The plank marks the entrance to the old canal, and the buildings were administrative. So that's the bookends, that's the Thames entrance, and we've seen the Severn entrance. Now let's go and see what we can find on the in-between bits. We'll do a bit of cherry picking. Initially the canal wasn't the Thames and Severn, it was actually the Stroud water, which brought the canal from the Severn to here, which is the centre of Stroud, and the merchants here needed access to cheap coal, so they built themselves a canal. It wasn't until much later that it continued on up there towards the Thames, which is why you have a tale of two canals. And this is the original wharf. This is where they discharged their cargoes just below Stroud before the Thames and Severn connection into those warehouses, old canal side warehouses. And now you see the canal bends to the right as it starts its Thames and Severn connection through those lock gates. Absolutely huge gates, must be at least 20 feet. And it leads us on then to Thames and Severn, on our way to London. But the first thing they did was to build themselves a new port just outside the lock gates, and there you see it in all its glory. And that's looking back, which puts the place in its perspective with regards to the centre of Stroud, I guess. That's the main road junction. The last remaining warehouse, built in 1828, with a brick monstrosity overlooking it. This is quite fascinating because the modern road up there has actually been built on the canal bed, so the council have built a canal bypass, and there it is. It's not pretty, but it's functional. And then at this point, the new gives way to the old once again. The canal wends its way up the valley. An old mill pond with its sluice. Thank you, British Rail. And a mile or so out of Stroud is the first lock on the Thames and Severn Canal, currently under restoration. This canal hunting's hard work. This is important in our story. This is the Gloucester to Sharpness Canal. It was built about 40 years after the Thames and Severn, and it cuts right through it. Down there, just where you can see the crane. The old canal came up from Framalode on the Severn through these meadows until it got to here, which had become known as Saul Junction. They then spent a year arguing about who's going to pay for the additional lock required. The Gloucester Sharpness Company arguing that the Thames and Severn should pay because they were going to benefit from joining up with their ship canal. But unfortunately the Thames and Severn held all the cards because they had a working canal. The Gloucester to Sharpness were trying to build theirs, so in the end they had to give in and they built the lock. And they made a pretty good job of it because it's still here now. Naturally, once the Gloucester to Sharpness was open, nobody used the lock or the lower part of the canal to Framalode. This is all that's left of it today. A reed-infested hollow. Boaters just came down here and then turned left or right and went along the ship canal, which was still a safer option than going on the Framalode route, which could be slightly risky. Anything that you can cut out of the River Severn is going to be worth doing. And the lock, which had caused all the grief, just became an ornament. And after all that nonsense, the old canal wanders off up here towards Letchley and on up there. It then wends its way through the fields and the meadows, with an occasional one of these for the use of farmers and others, and it keeps wending its way ever more towards the A38, just up there, and then quickly runs out of steam. Well, water anyway. Somebody building a home. Yeah, looks better already. Kitchen over there, I think. Bedroom there. Sitting room over here. Where are you going to put your telly? Fronbridge Mill with guest. They had some farce connected with the mills around here. The navvies dug the canal out by day, and the mill owners, not wanting to lose their water pressure, filled it in by night. Went on for a while till they sorted it out between them. A38. They plan to reopen this canal. I think you'll agree with me that they might have something of an issue here. The M5. They're not very happy. We're above the M5 now, it's 5 down that way, and this section from here all the way into Stroud is where they've concentrated the restoration efforts. We'll pop and have a look, see if we can get some pretty pictures. Before we head for the hills, there is one more place down here that we should look at. Brimscombe Port. This was once a huge basin, could hold over 100 ships or trowels, barges. It's all been filled in now, as you can see. There aren't many original old buildings left. There's this, the salt house. Salt used in the fixing of the colours in the cloth. There's an old wharfside cottage. That's actually a warehouse, not a mill. This warehouse is actually rubbing shoulders with the railway. Of course, the railway led to the demise of the canal, and they were a little bit blunt about it all. As you can see here, when the viaduct went past the warehouse, there wasn't enough space, so they cut a chunk out the warehouse, make room for their trains. And it's the old port wall still standing, complete with doorway, the original doorway. But I suppose the best looking building around here has to be the mill. The company actually bought this mill to stop the mill owner whinging about the loss of his water. So that's done the Stroud water bit, the bottom bit. Now let's have a look at some of the Thames and Severn. Wends its way here, all the way up the valley. 28 locks in 7 miles, and forever getting steeper and steeper. That would have said the distance between Wallbridge and Inglesham, Stroud and Lechlade. The locks up here do vary, which is not ideal really. What you need is a balanced lock system, so that the first lock that you drain on the summit level follows the craft all the way down through the various locks. If they're all the same size, works a treat. If not, it can give you problems. You either got too much water or too little until you reach the next water source or weir. As you can see, this one has a huge chamber at the head of the lock. That's where they would allow the water in and then discharge it into the bottom of the lock. And there you can just about make it out. It's something I've never seen before. It's a metal post that they hung the lock gate on. Odd. Last but one mill. Baker's Mill. There's a clue there somewhere. Can't think what it is. And judging by the size of the mill pond, this guy was serious. I suspect that might have been an electricity generating system. Failed. Here you get a good sense of the canal winding its way up the valley. It's quite open in this little patch. It'll soon close in again. Quite a rare stone built lock here. They're mostly brick on the Thames and Severn. You must have found a local source. The locks were all built by different people. So it's possible this guy had some stone left over from something else and thought he'd use it to make a bit more money. And it does highlight why they didn't have a balanced lock system. Part of the old fixings there for the main post, which they would have hung the lock gates on. Whilst next to the tree on that side, the post is still in place. And there, next to the lockkeeper's cottage, is the last mill on this side of the summit, Puck Mill, which means the river's nearby, down there. Oh well. And the next lockkeeper's cottage looms a very short distance away. And not much left of this one. And some old fallen forest giants there across the canal. They'll have to be cleared at some point. Keep somebody in firewood for a while. and the River Frome never very far away from the canal. They share this valley together, as does that. Whitehall Bridge, another one of these kind of in the middle of nowhere bridges. Serves somebody's purpose without a doubt. And this one is a very humpback affair. Looking back towards Stroud and then looking on up the valley. Even the coping stones look more rugged on this side. Showing the typical rope scarring from years of toil. Now there are one or two walks to be had round here. Typical Thames and Severn type Cotswold stone wall on the side of the towpath. Some old marsh marigolds. Frome again, and there you can see a stone built structure. They would have put planks against that to divert the water from the Frome underneath the bank here, where you see that plaque under the tree, to the canal, which you can just about see at the top. Very pretty and peaceful. Just another lock. We're now on a bridge which crosses one of the locks, and this enables us to see just how big these things are. Look right down there to get to the bottom of it. Here you can see the water draining into a sluice, and this would have been used to fill the lock, and that would have all been quite a way underwater. And there would have been a paddle, as they call it, a primitive valve that they would have released to let the water flow from there into the lock under there. You can just hear it entering now. From here on now it gets serious. There's 7 of these huge structures to the summit. Here's Mother Nature doing her best to claim it all back. On the side of the lock here they've actually built a spillway. They must have been confident of water supply. And a rare look from lock level into one of the exhaust sluices on the bank. And then underneath this ginormous tree is a sluice. This time it connects to the Frome, so it's a water feed. You can see here where the Frome has been collected from up the valley a little way and piped through to here. This is where they felt they needed it most to cope with all these locks. And don't forget, this engineering goes back to the late 1700s. the next lock. I'm hoping to give you a sense of scale. Huge great blocks. Not looking very safe at the moment, but safe enough. They've used stone here for the entrance, and then they've changed to brick for the main chamber. And there in the wall you can just see the recess for the lock gate. I'm not sure they did that to maintain the width or to protect their gates from damage. Both probably. At the bottom you can see the archway, which is where the water came through to fill the lock from the upper level. They did it through there rather than let the water come in through the side of the lock to be more stable for the boats in here. They would bow on then to the rushing torrent rather than having it pushing at the side. Quite pretty, isn't it, really? You can make out the method of construction of the walls here, look. Huge great stone blocks, and then brickwork up from there, using the stone blocks as a foundation stone. When you see the water running like that, you're tempted to think they must have had enough water up here, but this is April, so this is still draining out the hills from the winter, and to fill a lock of this size take a long time even with that amount of water. And finally the summit section, and there through the trees a very large basin, mainly used while you waited your turn to use the canal. The Daneway Inn, built to house the workers on this summit section, and later it was turned into a pub called the Bricklayers Arms, which is appropriate considering all the locks and the tunnel that had to be built. Don't know how the Daneway fits in. There's a short section here of the summit level that's still in water. That's better than he managed when it was a working canal sometimes. Just of here the canal starts to turn in towards the hillside, and here with the canal just of there, our old friend the Froome is right there with us. Strange really, because it appears to go under the canal, and yet there's no sign of it anywhere else. Odd. I'm sure it doesn't rise there. Then round one last sharp bend, and we have the piece de resistance, Severn Tunnel. 2¼ miles long, 6 years to build, finished in 1886. An amazing structure, kind of forgotten really. Just standing here in the middle of nowhere, just listening to the bird song. Thing leaking like a sieve, and in need of a bit of pointing up here and there. When I'm standing here, it's actually freezing cold. You can feel the cold air coming out, and there's an echo. Well, that's about it for this side then. I can't think we can do much more on this side, so now we're going to have to skip across to the other portal and see what's over there. Hello! Well, would you believe it? No, I didn't think you would. This is the Coats End then, after 2¼ miles of gruelling tunnelling. When the boats went through it, they laid a plank on top of the boat, and then 2 men, one either side, would walk the boat by walking along the walls of the tunnel. Amazing. Built in the classical style, whereas one we've just seen at Sapperton was Gothic. But then you knew that. And so let's see what else we can find. Built to house navvies building the tunnel. Now a pub. This leads away from the tunnel. This section, as you can see, is concrete lined. We think it was probably done by the Gloucester County Council in an effort to plug some of the leaks. Still just a short way from the tunnel. And there's a bank slippage there. Part of the ongoing problems of canal maintenance, especially up here. Quite a rugged section. So this then is the summit level, the top section. And if the other side of the tunnel was plagued by locks, this was plagued by leakage to the tune of 3 million gallons a day, and that was on a good day. And now it wends its way across fields and meadows to Lechlade. It can be a bit flat and boring in places, but we can find a few things of interest along the way, never fear. You can see it's quite a deep cutting here. They wanted to avoid locks if they possibly could. An old stone mar post, counting the mars between Inglesham and Warbridge. And about 3/4 of a mile from the tunnel, we have our first lock. This section isn't to raise the boats up or down, it's actually called a stop lock. And it was built here on the summit level, so that when there was a leak, not if, when there was a leak, they simply closed the gates or put boards down in there and shut off the leaking section, so you didn't drain the water out the whole of the summit level. And the big plus was it came with one of these, a lockkeeper's cottage. And the story goes that the lockkeeper's wife insisted that he build her a kitchen. See that monstrosity there? Simple but functional. I'll let you judge. The main living area with entrance to the kitchen. And the beautiful Skew Bridge, the Gloucester to London railway line. Absolutely fabulous. And if you look at the brickwork on the arch, that's pure artistry, and it ends in what's known as sawtooth. Remarkable. We're now about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from the tunnel, still in a cutting, and the canal now takes a sharp right hand turn, and that's why on the wall over here some very serious rope wear marks. That's a joint. We want to get your rope in there because it would jam, but these are about the deepest we've seen so far. And the canal just wends its way onward, still in the cutting. Perhaps they thought that would prevent some of the leaks. Didn't work though. And just a little bit farther on, and we've got another stop lock and a rather noisy jet. But this one hasn't got any fancy gates. It's got a brick sill and a slot for the plank. And then just up here we find this magnificent structure, which actually allows you to drain the water out of this section of the canal through the embankment and out into the fields, so that you can do essential maintenance, which I had to do quite frequently. Some old metalwork still in place, and some master mason even going to the trouble of putting a chamfer on the lintel. Totally unnecessary out here in the middle of nowhere. Just pride in his work, I guess. And this is where the culvert would have exited on the opposite side of the embankment. Now bricked in for safety. And a rare treat here, we can walk down the canal bed. Can you imagine serenely floating down here? All the while accompanied by a Cotswold stone wall, built by the company to stop your horse from bolting off to the grass. And a nice rustic bridge in a nice rustic location. This illustrates the problem perfectly. The substrate here is full of small stones and rocks, which is very free draining. Good for farming, but not too good for canal building. Minding his own business. Probably wishes we would. I'm actually standing in the River Thames here, which I don't actually need my Wellingtons, it's dry. Source of the Thames being just over there. But that's not what's important to us. What we're looking at, the buildings up here. And they were actually the pumping station. After 2 years of running the canal, it was obvious they were going to need extra water, especially in the summer months. So they bought themselves a Bolton and Watt beam engine and started pumping water into the canal, which goes just along there. That's the actual line of the canal there. There aren't any photographs of the pumping engine, just this slightly whimsical sketch. A little bit farther along, and now you can see the buildings much modified. They of course look nothing like that in the canal days. The line of the canal goes between those blossom bushes. Couldn't resist that, and someone's going to be upset when they have to re-dig out the canal for the restoration. I think they may have to get another route. This is a rarity. It's a three-way bridge. There's a railway across the top, the road as you can see there, and the arch just to the right, now unfortunately very covered, was for the canal. 3 in 1. And here to prove it, look, there's some rope burns. And deep in the undergrowth, bridge, canal. And a matter of a few yards from that bridge is this one. This is called an accommodation bridge, obviously accommodates some farmer. And this one is significant because it's called Halfway Bridge. It's halfway between Inglesham and Wallbridge, by all accounts. Then if you look carefully at it, you can see they've incorporated a stop lock. Well, somewhere to slip boards anyway. The reason they had so many stop locks is that the top section is 9.5 miles long, the summit level. And so if you start a leak in that and lose 9.5 miles of water, that's quite a significant amount to make up again. And the canal disappears that way, on our way to Lechlade, until it reaches here, which is Siddington. And the significance of Siddington, apart from Lawmers, is that here's where the branch line for Cirencester went off, up there. And as if that wasn't exciting enough, now we're back into locks again. That's what we've just been standing on. Rope burns, naturally. It's a view from the bargee's point of view. Cirencester that way. Then looking out from under the bridge, you can see that the basin has been formed here. I guess this is where you transship your goods from Thames Severn to the Cirencester branch before entering the locks down there. Steps to get you up onto the wharf side. Off to the side's another spillway where they get rid of excess water. I don't suppose that had too much use. There's a culvert there, just bottom left, and then off down into the locks. This is actually a flight of locks down here, about 4. You can see the curvature in the brickwork here. Look where the lock gates swung. And this one with the sailboat still in place there is very deep. Yep, that's tall. 100-year-old timber still in place. And here's the detail. That's where the gates would have folded back. And the paddle, which was the thing that let the water out through the lower gates, will fit on there. Proves it was actually mounted on the back of the gate. So we'll come that way. And it will fit in there. Brilliant brickwork. Beautiful tool marks on that block. And some more, carved out well over 100 years ago. Top of the lock gate, and you can see the fittings there where the metal struts would have gone to retain the upper part of the gate. There's quite a wide basin between the locks, as you can see. I suppose that's so that the barges transshipping for Cirencester didn't block the channel. Unfortunately, they've built houses on the rest of the locks. So this is as good as it gets, 2 in a row. Once you got through the locks, you then set off through the fields and the meadows. Section here, as you can see, still got a drop of water in it. Past a magnificently restored one of those. And even more fields. The fence line there is actually the line of the canal. Infield, as you can see. As is the lock on the other side of the road. As you can see, it belongs to the private dwelling now. Special treat if you promise not to get too excited. In the middle of nowhere till the original milestones. Wallbridge 22, Inglesham 6. Same on there. Just set out there by the side of this magnificent farmyard. Now, I think this characterises the canal up here in the Cotswolds. There's another accommodation bridge, but all traces of the canal have completely disappeared. Not a single trace. The farmer now gets to his field simply by driving across what was once the canal. There's no need for the bridge. Well, this is Kempsford, and it's really our last chance of contacting the canal, because from here on it goes mainly on private land, but unfortunately it's gone. All that we have now are 1 or 2 little signed reminders, and the rest has all been built on. Familiar story. And that's probably one of the few remaining original buildings. And there you have a garden, perhaps the line of the old boundary wall. Just outside Kempsford now, on the Inglesham side, you can just see the church in the top left, and the trees on the right denote the line of the canal. And standing on what would have been the bridge, still looking to Kempsford, and that's about all there is to see. And looking the other way towards Inglesham, That's about all there is of the line of the canal. We're about 3 miles from Inglesham here, so not far really. So here we are, journey's end, and it's quite fitting that we come back here, Lechlade. The canal was quite successful for 100 years or so, and they found that the wharf that they had back at Inglesham, up there, we saw at the start, couldn't cope. So they came down here to Lechlade and they built quite a few of the buildings that you can see. They also built this house, the dock, ship repair, still being used today. And so that really concludes the story, Thames and Severn. If you enjoyed it, join me on the next one.